Okay, we are studying Jacob today, working our way through the Patriarchs. We've been through creation. Next week, we actually get into the Exodus era, and we'll talk about a fellow named Moses. But I promised you this. Here's a timeline. Wouldn't you like to see a timeline as to where we are? I don't know. Is it very clear? Yeah, it's sometimes when you make something big, bigger isn't always better. But figure Abraham being around 2000 BC. We're probably in with Jacob probably around in the late 1800s or close to 1900 BC. As you'll see, the Exodus is really in the 1400s. Some people put it in the 12s. Scholars cannot agree on anything, can they? But I just wanted to show you where we were in history. So we're going to look at Genesis 28, where we're going to start. And we'll be at verse 10. Now we left Jacob last week. He had kind of pulled some shenanigans on his brother and got the blessing from Isaac. And his brother said, "I'm going to kill him." And Mama said, "Time to go home. It's time to leave town, son. Go see Uncle Laban. And besides, she wants you to find a wife there because Esau had married those Hittite women, and they were driving her crazy." And then he went and married, just to really show how arrogant he was, he married an Ishmaelite woman. So they might be worse than those old Hittite women, who knows. All right, Genesis 28, verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. Where was my pillow then? Can you imagine using? You know, it's hard to fluff up a rock. Because I have to fluff my pillow. I have to get my pillow just right, or I can't sleep. Could you imagine using a rock? But they were tougher back then. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. We used to sing a song about this. Y'all remember the song? We are climbing Jacob's ladder. This is called Jacob's ladder here. Verse 13. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you, and we will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." He was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! There is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillow and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel. There's a lot of churches named Bethel Baptist Church. Though the city used to be called Luz. The word Bethel means house of God, if you were wondering. Verse 20, then Jacob made a vow saying, "If God will be with me and watch over me on this journey I am taking, will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone that I have set up as a pillow will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give a tenth." Now the law has not been written yet, because we didn't have Moses yet. but the tenth was a common amount given to deity in these days. See, a lot of the Mosaic law were not foreign to the Israelites. A lot of the things in the Mosaic law were just common practice. So Jacob goes on, and so he goes on where you meet women. Y'all remember Happy Days? The Fonz said that you meet women in the grocery store. But in these days, you meet them at the watering hole. And so that's where he went. And he met Rachel there. He was real strong. Here's a picture of Jacob's ladder, by the way. But he moved a stone by himself. The women used to have to wait for some men to come and move that stone, and Jacob moved it by himself. So even though he seemed like a softy compared to Esau, he must have been pretty stout. And so he goes and he meets Rebekah, falls in love with her, madly in love. And so her brother Laban, who was a pretty slick character, pulled a little trick. Now he had Laban had an older sister named Leah, but Jacob wasn't. Leah, yeah. And I don't know what this looks like, but she had weak eyes. So he didn't like her as much as he liked Rachel. And but Laban's a pretty slick character, because see, their custom was you don't give away the younger sister before you give away the older sister. So flip over to chapter 29. We'll pick up the story there. Verse 20. 29:20. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel. See, he made a deal. I'll work for you for 7 years. You let me have Rachel. But they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. See, we don't think of people back then having this strong love, do we? We think of the women as being nothing but breeding stock. But that was actual love. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time has completed, and I want to make love to her." So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. It must have been dark.
Maybe he had weak eyes.
Yeah, or maybe he had feasted a little bit too much on the wine too. Who knows? And Laban gave his servant Zipporah to his daughter as her attendant. When morning came, there was Leah. Guess who you woke up with, Jacob? So Jacob said to Leah, "What is this you have done to me? To Laban, I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It is not our custom to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, and we will give you the young one also in return for another 7 years of work." See, this Laban guy is pretty slick too. And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. I was thinking it was a sister, but it's his daughter. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. Now then, God noticed that Leah was not loved, so he let her have the first children. And so here's how it goes, okay? Look up at the screen. And you have Leah with her servant Zilpah, and you have Rachel with her servant Bilhah, or however you pronounce it. Well, Leah, right off the bat, has Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Then Rachel says, well, I can't let you get ahead of me. I'll give you my servant. And so Bilhah had Dan and Naphtali. And then Leah said, you can't get ahead of me. I'll give you my servant. And so Zilpah had Gad and Asher. And I always thought that maybe Gad was real ugly because when he came in, what would you like to name this child? He looked at him and said, Gad. Gad and Asher. But then Leah had Issachar, Zebulun, and eventually Dinah, the only girl in the bunch that we know of. And then Rachel had Joseph and Benjamin, and she died in childbirth with Benjamin. That made Benjamin, I think, real special to Jacob, as we'll see when we look a little bit at the Joseph story. So is that 12? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, yeah. 12 sons who would become the basis for the 12 tribes of Israel. Now let's look at flip over to chapter 32. Now, Jacob ended up outsmarting Laban because he was pretty slick too. You remember his name meant heel snatcher or deceiver. And so he pulled a little deal where he ended up with better sheep than Laban did. And his flock was stronger and bigger than Laban, and the guys that worked for Laban were noticing this, and they were griping, so Jacob decided, well, it's time to head home. But guess what? To get home, he's going to have to face Esau, the last thing he heard wanted to kill him. And so Jacob, he must have been a pretty good strategist. He divided his camp into two groups where you wouldn't lose everything. And so in verse 32, verse 9, he did this. Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers and their children. But you have said to me, he's reminding God, but you have said to me, I surely will make you prosper and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. He spent the night there, and from what he had with him, he selected a gift for his brother Esau. And just to show you how rich he was, just take a look at this. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, and 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. That's a lot of stuff. So he has a lot of stuff. He put them in the care of his servants, each herd by itself, and said to his servants, go ahead of me and keep some space between the herds. He instructed the one in the lead, when my brother Esau meets you and asks, who do you belong to and where are you going and who owns all these animals in front of you, then you are to say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us. He also instructed the second, the third, and the fourth who followed the herds. You are to say the same thing to Esau when you meet him. And be sure to say, your servant Jacob is coming behind us. For he thought, I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending on ahead. Later when I see him, perhaps he will receive me. So Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in the camp. So you see what he's doing. He's trying to butter Esau up a little bit here. Look at all this stuff I'm giving you. And he had his camp split up, and he ended up across the river by himself. then in verse 24 of chapter 32, look what happens. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go until you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." So the word Israel means he who struggles with God. Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." And that's what the word Peniel means, face of God. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. I don't know if they still do that or not. When this was written to this day, they do not. It was not part of the law.
In the Seder meal, they have that bone there that is part of the, they don't eat the bone, but it is represented there in the Seder meal.
Oh, okay. So, here's Jacob wrestling. Question for the class. This is a good question. I'm anxious to hear some answers. Who was Jacob wrestling with? You have, from what I see, I think you have three choices. Was it Yahweh? Was it the angel of the Lord we read about? Or was it Christ as a Christophany?
Well, the scripture says I saw God face to face.
Yeah. But Jesus is God too. I mean, Christ is God. And the angel of the Lord, that's an interesting one, because sometimes the angel of the Lord is Yahweh.
Yeah.
And, Yahweh came as a man to Abraham. And Abraham literally Jewed him down to how many people would be in Sodom. Sodom. And I don't know the answer, but it doesn't matter. It was God, whatever form he took.
Mm-hmm.
Now then, you have to wonder though, how come Jacob couldn't whip? How come he couldn't whip Jacob? Or do you think he was trying to whip Jacob? I think he could have whipped him any time, don't you?
He wanted him to have that injury where he would be reminded of him.
Yeah. Sometimes we wrestle with God too, and he might leave us with a limp. But he also leaves us with a blessing. And I couldn't help but remember what Paul said in 1 Corinthians. Therefore, in order to keep me from being conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why for Christ's sake I delight in weaknesses and insults and hardships and persecutions and difficulties, for when I am weak, then I am strong. So sometimes God may weaken us to make us strong. And sometimes he gives us a little something to make sure we realize that we are human, and he humbles us. He keeps us humble. Because Paul could have really gotten the big head with his credentials and everything he was doing. And I've seen people trying to guess about what the thorn in the flesh was. There's no use in that. We don't know. He just didn't tell us. So sometimes we can wrestle with God and come away with a limp, but come away stronger.
Did he have poor eyesight or something weak in his eyes, Paul?
I don't know. Well, I know he wrote big where he could read it sometimes, but or where somebody else could read it. But we do not know what that thorn in the flesh was. The prophet Hosea gives us a little bit more insight on this battle to help answer the question earlier. In Hosea 6, the Lord has a charge to bring against Judah. He will punish Jacob according to his ways. Now, Hosea's work is prophesying up in the northern kingdom called Israel. But you know, he used the name Jacob here instead of Israel. And repay him according to his deeds. In the room, he grasped his brother's heel. He's talking about Jacob here. As a man, he struggled with God. He struggled with the angel and overcame him. So he calls him God in one sentence and the angel in the next. Isn't that strange? Now, remember, the word angel just means messenger. He struggled with the angel and overcame him. He wept and begged for his favor. He found him at Bethel. He talked with him there. The Lord God Almighty, the Lord is his name. But you must return to your God, maintain love and justice, and wait for God always. Israel, as we'll see when we get to the divided kingdom, Israel, the northern kingdom. If you were going to do a lesson series on the good kings of Israel, it would be a very short series. It might not even get to do any. There were a few in the southern kingdom, but not so well in the northern kingdom. So the next day, Jacob sends all these animals in toward Esau, and it's like a big giant parade. And he puts female servants in front, and he's got his family in the rear. But Esau ended up being friendly. And he said, come on over to the house. And Jacob more or less said, if I'm not there by supper time, start without me. Jacob didn't go. He headed somewhere else. He headed toward Succoth, which was a very old town. There's Jacob meeting with Esau, if you care. Here's a map that shows Jacob's travels. I think he's in red. Okay, chapter 33. So that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. Jacob, however, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Succoth. After Jacob came from Paddan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem or something, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. There he set up an altar and called it Elohi, I guess it is, Israel. That means God of Israel or mighty God, and the term Succoth means booths or shelters. Then God told Abraham to move to Bethel, and so he heads that way, and Benjamin is born to Rachel, but Rachel dies in childbirth right there close to Bethlehem. And you remember when King Herod sends people to kill the boy babies around Bethlehem, the prophecy talks about Rachel is crying for those babies. So, we're about finished. Chapter 35. Jacob came home to his father Isaac in Mamre, near Kiriathath Arba. That is, in other words, Hebron, okay, where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. Isaac lived 180 years, then he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people, old and full of years, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. So they got back together for the funeral. So Jacob has 12 sons, and these are going to be the basis for the 12 tribes of Israel. And And here's kind of a breakdown of who had who or what. And we're going to see, though, when we see the territories divided, there's some different names in there. We'll figure that one out. Jacob has the 12 sons, and the seed that we're following from Genesis 15 through this golden thread that runs through all these people. Started with Seth, and then Noah and Shem. It's running through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we'll see that it also runs through Judah, who we'll look at next week a little bit. So the promise, Jesus is from the tribe of Judah. That's where the promise is. That's where the golden thread runs. And so we'll look at that and begin talking about the Exodus next week. I have a few minutes for questions or Q&As or comments. Marilyn?
I never have quite understood why God wrestled with God, but your chapter in Hosea said something about God had a charge against Jacob and was punishing him.
Oh, well, now
You know
that
what was?
that charge, he was calling Israel Jacob, and his charge was against the northern kingdom of Israel, because that's where Hosea was.
Okay, so it
And
was Jacob.
No, not Jacob himself. Sometimes the name would flip back and forth. So it was against the nation, not Jacob.
Well, the individual Jacob, do you have any insight into what God was accomplishing or why this wrestling?
To me, if you wrestle with God, he might let you look like you're winning, but you know you're not. All he has to do is slap you on the hip, and that takes care of that. But maybe he needed to show Jacob that he was human. He let him. I think God lets us wrestle with him sometimes. We look like we're winning, but we're really not. And I think he was making sure that Jacob understood just who he was and what he was, and that he was not going to defeat him. He may have thought he was.
Yeah. Well, the timing right before he was to meet Esau, you think that's important? Why God said to wrestle with him?
I don't know. That was the only time he'd be alone. He found himself across the river. He was all by himself. But now Esau ended up being friendly. Invited him to supper that night, but he didn't go.
Well, Jacob was petrified though.
Oh yeah, he was scared of Esau because, Roy?
Did the Jews in Israel go off in dispense, or what happened to them at the time?
You know, you hear people talking about the 10 lost tribes.
Yeah.
I'm here to tell you that a lot of those people from those tribes, when the kingdom split, they came back to Judah because they were going to worship in Jerusalem. They were not going to worship on Mount Gerizim or in the Samaria area. So I think some of the Jews from the other tribes probably ended up down in Judah. It was mostly from Judah though, because when the Israelites came back from captivity, they were called Jews, which means men of Judah. So it was mostly the tribe of Judah, and Benjamin was also embedded in Judah. You know, Paul was from the tribe of Benjamin. But see, what's bad is a lot of those records got lost in AD 70 when the temple got destroyed. A lot of the genealogy records. But I guarantee you there were some people from the other tribes probably moved back south because they wanted to worship Yahweh instead of Baal. But I think it was predominantly the tribe of Judah.
was the, after the temple was destroyed, now, they scattered again, didn't they? Like I know some people in.
They did somewhat.
You know?
When they really scattered was around AD 132 or something like that. They had another uprising, and the Romans kicked them plumb out of the city and changed the name of the city. And see, not having the temple, they couldn't do their worship stuff and their sacrifices and everything.
Was it at that time that the Roman ruler changed the name to Palestine?
I'm not sure when the name Palestine came about.
It was one of
It was a different name that they called it, but the area, the word Palestine is tied in with Philistine.
Yeah, but this Roman ruler gave it because he didn't want it to be.
He may have, but he totally changed the name. It wasn't Palestine that he changed the name to. I can't recall the name of it, but he ran them all out of the city.
Bill, we know that, Anna, the prophetess that was in the temple when Jesus came to be circumcised, it says what tribe she's from. So there were many that knew what tribe they were from.
Yeah.
And God knows exactly where they are.
Yeah.
They're not lost.
And I guarantee you, they had records in the temple that probably got destroyed when the temple got destroyed.
I think that's why every Jewish mother thinks maybe her child is going to be the Messiah,
It might be.
regardless of
Yeah.
what tribe they're from.
Yeah, it's a shame they don't know that he's already been here and gone. Okay, next week we'll talk about
I want to go back to wrestling.
back to wrestling. Okay.
With what Marilyn was saying, just to make a couple of statements here. Yes, I do believe that he was wanting to put a little bit of humility in Jacob at this particular point, because Jacob had been taking things. He prayed to the Lord, yes, but mostly bargaining. If you go over to 28, and when he said that Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and keep me on this journey, then I will do so and so. You don't, if God, you do this, then I will do that. Okay, there he did that in 28, and then he bargains all the way through. We go over to 32, and then he does the same thing about, he prays, and he says, "Oh God, to my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac." Okay, he does pray that way. And he talks about he's not worthy of anything. Deliver me. This is, if you deliver me, I pray from the hand of my brother, and that I fear for him. For you've told me I'll prosper. But he bargains with him. If you'll do this, then if you'll take care of me with my brother, then I'll do this. Well, I think he really, and this is just my thoughts, I think he really wanted to remind Jacob of who he was, and then to say in the middle of it, why is it that you ask who I am? My name. Why are you asking my name? He wanted Jacob to be totally and completely dependent on him, and that hip is going to be the reminder.
Every time he walked, he thought of that.
Every time he walks. So you see where he was praying to the Lord, and he was depending on the Lord in some way, but there was always that slight stop just this side, because we do the same thing. We do the same thing. So God will stop and remind us quite often of who we are. Maybe with a suffering time that he then blesses us. So that's kind of where I am, Marilyn. So on that.